Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Sharlee Dixon. Today, I'm joined by Jillian Acosta, a registered dietitian specializing in functional medicine and the psychology of eating. Jillian leads the root cause method, where she combines nutritional therapy and psychedelics to help clients heal their relationship with food, emotions, and self, while addressing the trauma underlying chronic health issues. Drawing from her own transformative journey through childhood food struggles and an eating disorder, Jillian offers innovative programs like Wildflower and The Garden, empowering clients to achieve profound, lasting well being. We're excited to welcome Jillian to the show to explore how her personal journey with food and trauma has shaped her innovative approach to healing through functional medicine, the psychology of eating and trauma informed care, and to dive into her use of food as a bridge to uncover deeper emotional issues. Jillian, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I am always so interested in how people got into their journey and their chosen career. So, as we get started today, can you tell us about your personal story and how that really shaped your work in dietitian?
Yeah, so I had been struggling with my relationship with food since I was a child and really lacked a reference point of life prior to the development of that pattern. But that was like really the only thing I knew to self-soothe. It was like in moments of anxiety or fear, sadness, overwhelm, even happiness and celebration, it was like I was always reaching for food. And it spun into a pretty severe eating disorder in my teens and early 20s, and I checked myself into a recovery center for bulimia and binge eating disorder when I was 22, and really sought help in that kind of more westernized realm. And while that was really beneficial in some ways, I met other people on the journey, and that was really encouraging for me at that moment because it had been such an isolated journey. It was focused on behavioral change modification, like it was, or behavior modification. It was like, when you're triggered, do this instead. And I really became curious and quite fascinated relentlessly about like what was triggering the trigger. Like what was this activation even coming from that was inspiring me or provoking me to eat in this way that felt totally beyond my control. And so I really started to seek deeper. And I explored various modalities and eventually heard a podcast talking about the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics. And on this particular podcast, the gentleman was sharing about how a friend of his with a severe eating disorder sat in an ayahuasca experience and came out with like full-blown remission. And as we know, eating disorders are psychiatric. They're
Mhm,
they're deep, they're mental.
mhm,
And one could argue they're obviously they impact the physiology tremendously. There's a huge physical component there, but there's also a spiritual component. And when I heard this, I was like floored, and I became obsessed with like you're ravenously consuming the literature around psychedelic application, and in the form of interviews or scientific studies that were, from a long time ago, books, all that kind of stuff. I was like consuming crazy. And then finally I made my way into the sphere of it, which took a couple of years. And in one of my first few psychedelic experiences, ayahuasca, a big, huge truth was revealed. I learned that I had been molested as a very, very young child between the ages of 3 and 5 years old, and I had no recollection for 3 decades. And in that moment, despite all of the kind of bizarre but very resonant things that I was being shown and I was remembering, there was like an absolute flood of self-compassion that I was also experiencing because everything in my life prior to that revelation made sense to me. I finally understood why I had put myself through so much abuse, why I had such a fractured relationship with myself. I carried so much shame. I couldn't stand to be in my body and feel, and didn't feel safe in the world, and everything made sense. And so I really just plunged into the world of healing and transformation. And what started to reveal itself was that like this process of healing and going back and remembering and grieving and raging and feeling, teaching myself how to feel again, all of a sudden I was harvesting incredible wisdom that I knew I needed to offer other people that have either had similar experiences or have had experiences that disconnected them from the truth of who they are and created a disempowering narrative, even if it wasn't sexual abuse. It was like there's a through line. And it just became, that one of the biggest gifts that came out of this whole experience is the gift of my purpose, of like really feeling lit up by what I do and having the honor to serve in the ways that I do. And that's my story. And so, yeah, food, nutrition it came into the play when I was struggling with an eating disorder because I wanted to learn how to hack the system and get as thin as possible so that I could be
Mhm.
happy and be free of the suffering
Yeah.
and all the crap that we're fed. And I
Yeah.
ended up falling in love with the field of dietetics and nutrition and really biochemistry and all the
Mhm.
mechanisms and more integrative approaches to healing holistically, and have since kind of, yeah, really deeply expanded in the other realms of healing and transformation beyond just the clinical nutrition. And so that's been a facet of my work. But what I'm really doing on a deeper level is like helping particularly women reconnect to themselves and the truth of who they are and let the stuff that's not true fall by the wayside.
Wow. You've got a really powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And one of
Thank
the things that you started out saying is that food was such a huge part of your life, positive times, negative times. And to be
you.
honest with you, I think that that's probably a lot of our stories because American celebration and unhappiness, truthfully, really centers on food. Like we have a celebration and there's food. You have a party and there is food. You go through not so happy times and people bring you food. So it makes complete sense that food and overeating or undereating becomes such a coping mechanism for so many. How do you help clients uncover and address the root causes of their struggles with food? Because I know for some it's just I can eat today and it's fine and it doesn't become a bigger issue, but for many it becomes a larger part of their life. There's a struggle
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. A lot of people don't necessarily identify with the pattern of emotional eating, and they can be carrying excess weight and they still have that kind of, it's not necessarily denial, but it's like just this unawareness
Yeah.
of oh yeah, I am using food in that way. And so, the client that comes to me, there is somewhat of an awareness of like I feel out of control with food. I'm eating past the point of fullness. I'm eating when I'm not hungry. I'm entering into cycles of like shame or frustration with myself if I've eaten too much. Those are kind of classic signs that maybe there is some sort of a pattern with food that is disruptive, and really there's an emotional undercurrent to that pattern. And so, to know that is usually the client that I work with where they're ready to explore that. And so that's really helpful. And when they're ready to explore that, it's a combination of talking and me just kind of really being intuitive and asking certain questions that are really revealing into their story or their pattern, the uses of that food has had in their dynamic. But then I also incorporate the use of psychedelics, the use of ketamine specifically, which is an FDA approved psychedelic medication that's used in clinics and hospitals all over the world because its contraindications are so low. But in a particular dose and in a particular, like with particular intention, it induces an altered state of consciousness so that people can go back and have, repressed memories come to the surface. They can have huge alterations in their perspective of self or events or other people. And these massive transformations become possible when we access truth. In my case, my truth was what happened to me. I couldn't free myself until I accessed that truth. And it's similar for so many. So we're not necessarily digging around, but there's usually in those spaces something that comes to the surface that's ready to be known and explored and worked through that really creates such an incredible transformation.
Got you. And through this process of uncovering trauma, is it always a use of psychedelics or are there other methods that you use? So what does that process look like in practice?
Yeah, so there's an arc. It's a 3-month container, 13 weeks. and they are sitting with medicine on weeks 5, 7, and 9. So there's a lot of pre-integration, rapport, safety created in the container. And then in the middle of the program, that's when we're kind of doing the deep dive. We're really pulling out the roots of these stories, of these patterns, of those kind of identity structures. And then there's a lot of like really beautiful support in the middle of those medicine sessions and afterwards. I have had clients who've been pregnant or are just not in alignment with medicine who've gone through this program and still have a lot of really profound shifts. Of course, in the reason I include psychedelics in this process is that, 95% of our behavior is driven by the subconscious mind,
Hmm.
and that's also where the trauma lives.
Yep.
And so I see trauma as like this puppet master, and we're kind of on the strings until we're courageous enough to like see who's moving us, right? And so there's a marked difference between those who engage with in the use of psychedelics in my program and those who decide not to. Both have incredible transformational experiences, but when you tap into the subconscious mind and access what's in there, it's just, yeah, a remarkable difference.
Nice, nice. Okay. And so as I looked through your website, just trying to prepare myself today, I saw that you had a lot of different programs, I think 4 of them. Can you talk to us a bit more about those programs and kind of give us some insight on each one?
Yeah, so the garden is the one that I was referring to. The
Mhm.
garden is the one-on-one deep dive. You know, the garden is the place where I used to lay when I was a child, when I was moving through all of this stuff, and I would literally lay on my belly in the grass forever and just probably dissociate, but also really feel the soothing energy of the earth. And what I know about gardens is like really it's just an energetic container where things grow and evolve. And it's
Mm.
also, where weeds can grow and more opportunistic
Yeah.
species can grow and
Yeah.
kind of crowd out the seedlings of what we desire. And so I'm really guiding people to become their own gardener of their psyche, of their body, of their life, of themselves. And so we go and we tend to the garden, we uproot weeds that are opportunistic and and plant new seeds, and it's incredibly beautiful and transformational. And then another program that I have is called Wildflower, and the concept of that is to find the beauty in the weeds. It's really has been geared towards emotional eating. It's a group for women. It's a cohort of 10 weeks, and it is all about teaching women to utilize this dysfunctional relationship with food as the thing that reveals to them what their true needs are so they can free themselves from it, right? It's like moving through the pattern of emotional eating is what actually frees you from it instead of trying to avoid it or go around it or take, peptides or Ozempic or something to try to make it go away. It's like we're not addressing
Mhm.
it at the root. So,
Yeah.
there's that. I came from a very clinical, functional starting point of my business where I was
Yeah.
analyzing labs and creating protocols and doing
Mhm.
like GI work and all of that. And while I love that stuff, I am starting to pivot away more of like the energetic and the trauma informed and this and even the spiritual. And so I've had different people that I've brought onto my team to kind of maintain those offerings. And in full transparency, my business is in like a really kind of epic and very uncomfortable place of transition while I'm getting really clear on like who I'm here to serve and what that looks like.
Mhm.
And as I transform and evolve, so does my work. And so,
Absolutely.
that's where we are.
Nice, nice. And so I want to dig a little deeper into the garden program. First of all, I really like how you relate it back to your life and really being able to you lay in that garden and you really get a sense of refreshment from there. But then also there are negative things that may pop up in a garden as well. So I really like
Totally.
that you connected those two together there. So can you walk us through that 13-week journey? You did mention a bit of it on, how a few of those weeks deal with the psychedelics, but can you walk us through that 13-week journey and what that program really entails?
Yeah, beautiful. So the first 2 weeks were in the module called Design Your Garden. And, my thinking around this is like whenever there's like a landscape architect or, a gardener or whatever who's employed, they don't just like throw a bunch of seeds together and like kind of hope it works. They're very intentional about like what they're creating and where they're placing what and how much light and shade and all the things. And so it's like if we don't come in with the intention of like, what are we calling forth? What do we want? I think a desire is a really powerful force that is unique to every individual. And I think it's on a level of a soul. It's like what you desire is going to be different from me because that's what you're here to fulfill on. And it's different from my journey and my evolution. And so getting clear and even giving people, women especially, permission to like tap in. What do you want? Like, what do you actually want? And from that space, what's also revealed is what's standing in the way. And so there's a 2-part exercise we do on weeks 1 and 2 to kind of bring all that kind of stuff into the light, into the container. Like what do you want and what's in the way of that, just to get clear. And then immediately I'm inviting them into a daily practice, morning ritual, which is like your time to connect with yourself in the sacred, to start to listen to your intuition and quiet the mind and come back into the body and enter into a space of listening beyond the ears. And that is something that women can commit to throughout the course of this program, because that is, I mean, what it's doing on so many levels is profound, but it's fundamentally teaching you on a subconscious level that you're worthy of allocating time for before you give your time and energy to anybody else in the day.
Yeah.
You can't pour from an empty cup. So it's like
Right.
teaching and guiding women to pour into themselves first. And then from that space of overflow, you serve at a much higher level of love and intentionality. And so that's like week 1 and 2, the opening of the container. On week 3, there's a module called Preparing the Foundation, and that's where it's the most didactic, the most clinical. By then I have their lab results, and I have created a protocol based on their unique physiology. So I'm still doing that part. Whether it's blood or stool or whatever, depending on what they present with, I'm creating a protocol to support the physiology, because what I've understood is if the body is so inflamed and there's been such dissociation, it's really challenging to come back into the body. And when we're in our bodies, we have access to our intuition and our power and our magic, and we're embodied, we're connected, we're a higher expression of ourselves. And so creating a kind of a structure for them to lean into and to try to adhere to, dietary wise, supplementation, lifestyle, etc., not only allows the physiology to come back into a healthier range, but whenever they deviate from that structure, we use it as gold. It's so insightful, because it reveals to me, like, what were they using food for? What were the needs they were trying to meet from in a surrogate form, with food or whatever other substances or patterns. And so it becomes this like beautiful illuminating thing that we get to use throughout the duration of the program. And then week 4, we move into the module called Uprooting the Weeds. And weeks 4 through 10, we're preparing for medicine, because week 5 is their first medicine experience. And so it's a lot of like more deeply talking about their story and their patterning and their relationship to self and their relationship to emotion, and setting intention about going into the first ceremony. And then each of the rituals, each of the medicine experiences are 3-hour calls. And so
Oh, wow.
I treat it like a ceremony, because it is. We're going to the subconscious, into the sacred, and so I open it as if it was, a sacred medicine, because it is, even though it's synthetic. And so creating a lot of safety and a lot of trust, and bringing them into their body and grounding them, and then allowing them to have that full experience, which usually takes around an hour and a half. And then we immediately go into integration. There's the most
Okay.
neuroplasticity immediately after the experience. And so it's an opportunity neurologically for these new perspectives to like anchor, to take root, and then we cultivate and we strengthen them. One of my favorite parts about ketamine, or really psychedelics in general, is like in a medicine experience, when you are confronting something uncomfortable, you're right there with it. You're breathing with it. You're feeling into it. You're able to explore it. Your capacity to be with something uncomfortable expands. And that, once nurtured, translates to ordinary states of consciousness, where all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can stay here with myself during this. I just faced off with one of my greatest shadows. Like, I have a craving for cookies. I can explore this now. I can be with this. Like, wow, I know this feeling. And so that begins to lend itself to unaltered states of consciousness. And, people have lost upwards of 40 pounds in my program, not because I put them on a diet, but because I'm teaching them how to be with stuff, their feelings, their stuff, and not
Yeah.
just check out and dissociate and numb.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they're
Interesting.
in that module till week 10, and then we move into planting new seeds and water and sunshine. And then the last call is called full bloom. And this is really about like deepening and strengthening and nurturing the new germinating seeds that were planted in the medicine experiences of like deep self-compassion or like worthiness, or like self-love or self-care, empathy, like all of these things that have become available and accessible are now getting to be nurtured, and then they get strong.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Whether you're a longtime or first-time listener to Behavioral Health Today, you're probably familiar with Triad, the company that brings you this podcast. But you may not know that Triad also hosts a community for current and aspiring behavioral and mental health professionals, featuring trending content and education and career resources, all for free. If you are a behavioral or mental health professional, or you're studying to become one, join more than 80,000 people on Triad by claiming your free professional account today. Visit us at hellotriad.com/BHT. That's hellotriad.com/BHT and join the Triad community today.
Nice. And so with psychedelics, I am very curious about this. And we talked about this right before we came on today. I'm very curious about it. And I know that ketamine is FDA approved, but what kind of precautions do you take to ensure that those sessions are safe for one and that they are being done responsibly,
Mhm.
especially for people that are already dealing with trauma?
Yeah. So I obviously, as a dietitian, can't prescribe any medication. So I
Okay.
have relationships with at-home ketamine companies where the client will go through a full intake process, psychosomatic, like,
Okay.
medical intake process to make sure that they are available. It's appropriate for them to sit with this medicine. So
Okay.
they are under the care of these companies and their medical teams or their psych teams before they touch the medicine with me. And then I'm really acting as like, you know, an integration specialist, but more like I'm holding space. It's not the Jillian show when they're in medicine. It's like they're having their own experience, and I'm right there to help create safety and support. But
Mhm.
I've never had an experience where someone needed this. But another thing that I do is they're never allowed to be alone at home when they take this. There's always
Okay.
either a relative or a friend, and I have their contact information. So if there's a moment of panic, I can reach out to their someone in their home and instruct that person how to come in and just be with that person and create safety, because you're really impressionable in those states. And so if someone
Mhm.
gently holds your hand and says you're okay, you're going to feel that. You're going to go into that space where you can regulate. All they need to have is a regulated nervous system for the person and the medicine to feel regulated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then speaking about the Wildflower program, and it's specifically for women with eating issues, how does the group work differ from the one-on-one sessions? And then how do you determine which program is best for a client?
Yeah, beautiful question. The group offers its own medicine that one-on-one can never offer.
Mm,
Like just
agreed.
the ability to allow yourself to be seen for things that you have maybe hid or felt shame around, and to be met with so much love and compassion and empathy once you reveal an aspect of
Mhm.
yourself is transformative and incredibly medicinal in and of itself. Despite any guidance, any instruction, that
Mhm.
container of women that are open-hearted, that are on this path, similar journeys, similar pain points, it's so incredible. And so if someone's in a space where maybe they've done group work or they've done online cohorts and they're really wanting to like deep dive into the nuances of their own story and their own patterning, and they're ready to explore more deeply in terms of trauma with psychedelics, for example, they would probably come into the garden. But
Okay.
if they're needing another flavor of support and they're really wanting community and accountability, and maybe they have an aversion to psychedelics, or they don't feel like they're there yet, or they've done one-on-one and now they know that, being seen is a really big challenge for them, and they're wanting to put themselves in that opportunity for growth, then maybe Wildflower. I never tell anyone which program they should do. I present
Okay.
the options and allow them to explore like which one feels more resonant. In terms of the financial investment, there's a difference, because one-on-one work with like a deep dive with just me for 3 months is its own, and Wildflower is more accessible. It's significantly less in terms of price, because I am serving multiple women at one time and want to make this work accessible for many. And so that's kind of how I've structured both of those offerings.
Got you. And I completely agree with you. The power of a group session, it even as a clinician, you're there to facilitate, but to just watch and be a part of the process of others, that group work is
It's
like
really
none other.
special.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so
It's incredible.
special.
Yeah, it definitely is. And so you mentioned your intake process. Can we talk a bit more about consultations or entry point for clients? So what
Mhm.
can someone expect when they reach out to you, and talk a bit more about determining how they determine which program is right for them?
Yeah, beautiful. So I always offer a 45-minute complimentary consultation. For the garden, it's like, it's a deep dive, and I want to make sure that I'm a match for them as much as they're a match for me, because, I do look for, pun intended, I do look for like a hunger for their own liberation. I look for this level of like desire for something else other than how it's been, this like completion with like resignation. I look for that in the garden. And if I feel that, then I meet them there. I pour my heart into, meeting them and holding them through this incredibly sacred transformational container. So it's a really beautiful time for us both for me to learn what someone is moving through and to explain the program, but also to see energetically if there's alignment. And I always offer complimentary consultations for all of my programs, because I want someone to feel that it is a full yes before, like, I don't sell anything. It's like, this is what I do. This is who I am. If you feel the resonance, let's go. And if not, I'm here to be a resource. I will, however I can, that's perfect for me. And so, yeah, someone could come to my site and book a complimentary consultation, and we get to just have a conversation and explore. They won't be sold on anything.
Got you. Got you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that some of your clients have had great success in weight loss throughout the program, but that's not necessarily what it is geared towards. It is geared towards creating safety to feel emotions. What types of transformations have you seen in clients who have embraced this process? What does success look like?
Oh, goodness. Such a great question. I mean, on a physiological level, inflammatory markers and biomarkers are optimized, and there's almost always weight loss, but also like vitality, right? Like there's just like a radiance and a vitality and like a confidence that emerges, but it's as a result of the reconnection to self. It's a result of self-care and self-love and self-knowing and self-seeing that allows someone to feel worthy enough to like pause and explore, a moment of trigger or like something uncomfortable, as opposed to just like self-abandon and go back to like the numbing and the dissociation. So it's ultimately like, yeah, reconnecting someone back to themselves. And that looks like the ability to speak truth and desire, the ability to like end dynamics, either work or romantic or platonic dynamics that are no longer serving. I mean, people have made radical changes in their lives because they come into a space of worthiness. I've seen a lot. It's been really incredibly rewarding.
Nice, nice. And so, for any listeners who might be struggling with food related issues, how can they begin to recognize whether their relationship with food is tied to unresolved trauma, or if they need extra help in the way that you can provide to them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to say this. It sounds like abrasive, and I don't mean it at all in this way, but it's like generally the people that are carrying excess weight, there has been a consistent pattern of overriding their physiology, and that indicates to me that there's an emotional component. I mean, we have hunger and fullness cues. We have the body signals like, "Okay, you're good, you're done." Leptin and ghrelin, these are hormones that tell the brain we're satisfied, we are done eating, or we need food. We haven't had food in a long time. And if we override those physiological cues and signals, it usually is from an emotional space of like, like wanting more soothing, like wanting to kind of fill something that food can never actually fill. And so if someone is carrying excess weight, that's kind of one potential indicator, unless they're like a medical outlier where they have a condition that, right? But that's not the masses. And like I mentioned before, if people are eating when they're not actually physically hungry, if you're eating past the point of comfort and now you've got to unbutton your pants because you ate too much and you feel really uncomfortable, if you enter into a space of like shame or frustration with yourself after eating, or eat in secrecy, or all of those kinds of things are indications that there is an emotional component, or an emotional dynamic with food that does not indicate that there is any flaw with your character. It just means that you've been through hard stuff that you haven't learned how to feel yet. It's felt overwhelming.
Yeah.
You haven't been supported in learning how to be with these emotions. And so you're doing the thing you maybe have always done as an attempt to regulate a very dysregulated nervous system. And so I have tremendous empathy and compassion, A, because I lived so much of my life in that space, but B, because I really fundamentally understand that it's trauma driven. It's not willpower. It's not character. It's like we're trying to live in a space of homeostasis, in a space of regulation and parasympathetic, status. We know no creature in nature can survive in a perpetually sympathetic state. They'll die.
Mhm.
And so we're constantly trying to regulate. And so many of us have learned that food like almost does it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
almost works.
Yeah. And then food is available and it is always there. And you can
Totally.
get it at, like I said, at any celebration, any
Mhm.
negative time. It is
Mhm.
food is ever present. You need it to live, but you still have to maintain
That's
how to
exactly
take care of
why it
yourself.
is a fascinating substance, because it's not like alcohol or narcotics where we could just omit it and be sober.
Right.
It's a substance that if we totally omit it, that's a different condition. That's anorexia nervosa. Like we
Right.
have to learn to dance with this thing. And I find that to be really incredibly beautiful and spiritual, because it's inviting us into like the full healing of this dynamic, of this pattern. Like it's not something that we can just cancel out. It's like, can we learn to integrate this pattern and free ourselves from it and have balance and harmony?
Absolutely. So it really brings me to my next question. Can you give some insights on how you work with clients to shift that relationship with food from one of disconnection and kind of coping to one
Yeah,
of connection and really just using it for nourishment and nutrition versus passion or compassion there?
totally. Well, the last word you just said is the doorway in my perspective. It's self-compassion. Yeah,
Mm,
everything changed for me when I learned my story, but not just because I learned it, but because I like felt like, oh my God, like this poor 3-year-old was going through hell in some iteration, and of course I reached for candy to soothe myself. Of course I learned and adopted this pattern to try to feel distraction, pleasure, a sense of okayness when I was a little girl, and that pattern, I just strengthened it. I just kept practicing that pattern. So if I can bring a client to the genesis of it, and help them not only see but really connect with and feel what they were moving through when this pattern came online, all of a sudden they have so much compassion for themselves, and then whenever they want to engage in that pattern again, that seed of compassion is there, and it's like, oh, I'm just trying to find soothing right now. I don't feel okay. Okay, let me figure out, let me practice how I can create the feeling of okayness, comfort, soothing in my body with myself, that has nothing to do with food. And that creates this feeling of like incredible empowerment, because when we can meet our own needs and regulate ourselves and become the versions of ourselves that cares for that little one, that's that's the transition from like little girl to woman. That's like reparenting. That's freaking freedom.
absolutely. Absolutely. So as we begin to wrap up today, what is one key takeaway you hope listeners will carry with them about the connection between food, trauma, and holistic healing?
Mm. That mm, I in a medicine ceremony, I received a very, very clear message that weight is nothing more than pain pushed down by food.
Mm,
And that for me is true. It resonates as truth in my body. It's like these people that are carrying excess weight, or maybe there's a manifestation of an illness, or something like that. It's all pain pushed down. And so if there's an opening for some compassion for yourself, of like why you're carrying this excess weight and begin to approach it from a radically different perspective than there's something wrong with me, I'm never gonna whatever, I'm not good enough. Like all of that stuff is just noise. And the truth, the entry point of actual like transformation, weight loss from the inside out is self-compassion and a willingness and courage to explore what happened to me that I'm pushing down every day with food.
That's powerful. Wow. Okay. And so for listeners who I know are going to be curious about engaging your work, whether that's through individual or group sessions, what steps can they take to start their healing journey with you? And so then where can listeners learn more about your programs, really?
Yeah, really just my website. I mean, my website is therootcausemethod.com. And there's an opportunity for them to request a consultation, and we just have a really beautiful conversation about where they are, what they're moving through, and explore. I have been pretty active on Instagram with a lot of content of value, sharing these perspectives and elements of my own journey and practices and things. They can subscribe to my newsletter, which is on my website, where I offer, again, insights to my journey, wisdom that I've collected, recipes, practices, rituals, that kind of stuff is all available for free. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Jillian, I have really appreciated speaking with you today.
Same. This was a delightful conversation.
It was. It definitely was. And thank you to all of our listeners for taking the time to join us. Before you go, we'd love your help. Please leave a review and share the podcast with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you for being such an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.